In a distant galaxy, Princess Lyra of the Zothar Empire was known for her beauty, wisdom, and strong leadership. She was admired by many for her calmness in the face of danger and her ability to make tough decisions. Yet, despite all her power and wealth, she felt lonely. The pressures of being a princess were immense, and she longed for a life that wasn't filled with politics and power games. Then, one day, she met a man unlike anyone she had ever known. His name was Caleb. He was not a prince, nor was he noble of any high rank. In fact, he was a simple human, one who came from a planet far away from the vast empires of the galaxy. He had a quiet, unassuming nature, and he lived a humble life. Caleb didn't care much for wealth or fame. He was just a traveler, a wanderer, who had come to the Zothar Empire seeking peace. When he first spoke with Princess Lyra, it was during one of the royal gatherings. His presence was unnoticed by many. At first, his simple clothing and plain face were not the type that would catch the attention of royalty. However, something about him intrigued the princess. He was kind, with a soft smile and gentle words. His eyes, though filled with the wisdom of a lifetime, were always calm, never hurried, and never filled with the arrogance that often came with high-born nobles. The princess noticed that while other men tried to impress her with grand speeches or expensive gifts, Caleb never sought to prove anything. He was just himself. Over time, Princess Lyra and Caleb grew closer. They spent hours talking about the simple things in life, the beauty of nature, the joy of helping others, and the importance of peace. It was a stark contrast to the royal events Lyra usually attended. Filled with scheming politicians and dangerous alliances, Caleb had no interest in her title or the crown she wore. He never asked about her empire or the wars she had fought. Instead, he listened to her with true attention, making her feel seen in a way no one had before. As the weeks passed, the princess found herself falling in love with him, not for his status, but for his sincerity and humble spirit. Eventually, they were married in a quiet ceremony, far from the lavish halls of the palace, only a few close. Friends were invited, and there were no grand celebrations. Just a simple wedding between two souls who had found each other against all odds. For Lyra, it felt like a dream come true. She had finally found someone who loved her for who she truly was, not for the crown she wore, but as the days turned, into weeks and weeks into months. The princess began to notice something strange about Caleb. Despite his calm demeanor and simple ways, there were moments when he seemed different. One evening, they were walking through the royal gardens. The air was cool, and the stars shone brightly overhead. Lyra held Caleb's hand, feeling completely at ease. But as they passed a group of palace guards, she saw Caleb's posture change. His body tensed slightly, and his eyes narrowed ever so briefly as he scanned their faces. The princess didn't say anything at first. She told herself it was just the way Caleb was vigilant, perhaps from the hardships of his past. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that his behavior wasn't quite normal. He was too alert, too cautious, like someone who had faced danger countless times before. There were other moments too, like when they visited the markets of the capital. Caleb's eyes seemed to follow every movement, as though he were searching for threats among the crowd. When a merchant accidentally bumped into him, Caleb's hand shot out, grabbing the merchant's wrist in a grip that was far too strong for someone who wasn't used to fighting. The merchant quickly apologized and stepped away, but Caleb didn't seem to notice. His gaze focused elsewhere at first. Lyra thought these were just odd quirks. After all, Caleb was from a different world, a world where life was harsh and survival was a daily struggle. But as the incidents continued, her curiosity grew. Who was this man, really? Was he truly the simple, humble human he appeared to be? Or was there something more to him that he wasn't sharing? The princess tried to push these thoughts aside. She told herself that it didn't matter. He was still the man she had married. The man who had shown her love and tenderness like no one else ever had. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder, could her husband be hiding something? If so, what was it? One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Lyra decided to ask him, She gently placed her hand on his, looking into his deep, thoughtful eyes. "Caleb," she said softly, "I've noticed that sometimes you act differently. It's like you're always prepared for something. Is there something you're not telling me?" Caleb looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, after a deep breath, he spoke. "There are things from my past that I've left behind," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Things I never wanted you to know about." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then slowly stood up. His back was to her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I am not the man you think I am, Lyra," he said, his voice filled with sorrow. "I wasn't always a simple traveler. I was once a warrior trained in combat, a fighter in a war you cannot even imagine." The princess stood up to her, eyes wide with shock. "A warrior," she repeated. But you're so gentle, so kind. How could you?" Caleb turned to face her, and for the first time she saw the hardness in his eyes. The weight of countless battles, the shadows of a life full of violence. "I chose to leave that life behind," he said, "but the skills I learned, the strength I have, they never truly leave. I am not the simple man you think I am, Lyra." Lyra stood frozen, the words he spoke sinking in. She had married a man she'd believed to be ordinary, but the truth was far more complex than she could have ever imagined. Princess Lyra sat quietly in her chambers, her mind racing. Caleb's words echoed in her ears. "I am not the man you think I am. A warrior, a fighter." The thought weighed heavily on her heart. She had married him believing he was a humble, kind man, someone she could trust, someone she could love without the shadow of war hanging over them. But now the truth had come crashing down. She had always known there was something different about Caleb, his strength, his calm demeanor, even in the face of danger, but she had pushed those thoughts aside. She had convinced herself that his quiet confidence was simply the result of living a life outside the chaos of politics and royalty. But now everything seemed uncertain. Could he truly be who he said he was? Lyra couldn't help but question everything. Why had Caleb hidden his past from her? She wondered if she had been foolish to believe in the simplicity of their love. But more than that, she wondered if she could still trust him. It wasn't just the fact that Caleb had been a warrior. That alone wasn't enough to shake her belief in him. But it was the way he had spoken, the sadness in his eyes as he spoke. Of the battles he had fought, the pain of leaving it all behind.
Allie.
Lyra had always known that the life of a ruler was filled with hardship, but she had never imagined that Caleb's life had been filled with such violence. The princess spent the night tossing and turning in her bed, trying to make sense of everything. She wanted to believe in him, to trust that the man she had married was still the same man she had fallen in love with. But the more she thought about it, the more doubts crept in. The next morning, Lyra decided to confront Caleb once again. Had to understand the truth, even if it meant uncovering things that might break her heart. When she found him in the palace gardens, she didn't hesitate. "Caleb," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to know more. Said you were a warrior, but you didn't tell me what that really means. What kind of man were you before? You came to me? Were you truly the person you claimed to be, or were you pretending to be someone else?" Caleb looked up at her, his face unreadable. For a moment, the air between them was thick with silence. Then, finally, he spoke. "I was a soldier in a distant war," he said softly. "A war that took me to places you cannot imagine. I fought in battles that shaped me into someone I am not proud of. I have seen things that no one should have to see." Lyra felt her heart sink. The warrior she had married wasn't just a man of simple pasts. He was a man who had fought and killed, a man who had lived through endless conflict. She had never asked him for these details, but now she needed to know them. She needed to understand who Caleb was, not just the man she had seen in front of her. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above whisper. "Why did you hide it from me?" Caleb sighed deeply, his eyes filled with regret. "I didn't want to burden you with my past," he said. "I thought that by leaving it all behind, I could start a new life with you, without the darkness of war following me. But the truth is, it never really leaves. It stays with you, even when you want it to be gone. For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. She could see the pain in Caleb's eyes, the weight of years spent in battles and wars, a life filled with bloodshed and loss. But there was something else in his gaze as well, something she had seen in him from the very beginning. It was a quiet strength, a tenderness that he had always kept hidden beneath the surface. She had believed in him before, and she wanted to believe in him now. But the princess also knew that trust had to be earned. It wasn't enough for Caleb to tell her about his past. It was how he handled it now that would determine whether she could still stand by his side. I don't know if I can forget the things you've told me, Lyra admitted softly. But I also know that I love you. I don't know who you were before, but I know who you are now. I want to believe that the man I married is still the same man who cares for me, who protects me. Caleb's expression softened. You can believe that, Lyra? He said quietly. I've left that life behind. I don't want to fight anymore. But there are things from my past that I can't change. Things that might come back to haunt us. Lyra's heart raced. What? Mean by that? Before she could ask more, a sudden noise interrupted their conversation. A small group of palace guards rushed toward them, looking panicked. One of them, a young officer named Yarek, quickly bowed before the princess. Your Highness, Yarek said, his voice filled with urgency. We've received a report. There's an attempted attack on the palace. The royal guards have intercepted it, but we believe more may be on the way. Lyra's eyes widened in surprise. What? Do you mean attack? The officer's face was grim. We're not sure. But the threat seems to be coming from outside the palace walls. It could be a rebellion or a raid from another empire. Without a word, Caleb stood up, his expression hardening. Lyra watched in awe as he moved. With a speed and grace she had never seen before, his demeanor shifted from that of a loving husband to something far more dangerous. He was no longer the calm, gentle man she had married. He was the warrior he had described, ready to face whatever danger lay ahead. Stay here, Lyra, Caleb said quietly, his voice filled with determination. I will protect you. Before she could protest, Caleb had already disappeared into the shadows, heading toward the heart of the palace. Lyra stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen him like this, so confident, so prepared. It was as if the warrior in him had been awakened once more. In that instant, Lyra realized that Caleb's past was not something he could easily escape. It was a part of who he was, and it would always be there, lurking in the shadows. But perhaps that was the very thing that would protect them both. The sounds of chaos echoed throughout the palace. Guards rushed past her, their footsteps quick and heavy. The air was thick with tension, and Lyra stood still, her heart racing as Caleb's words replayed in her mind. I am not the man you think I am. She couldn't deny the truth anymore. Caleb had once been a warrior, and that warrior was coming back to life before her eyes. His calm demeanor, his quiet strength, and his sharp focus now made sense. He had been hiding something all along, something she wasn't sure she could fully understand, but there was no turning back now. The palace was under attack. Who would dare attack her? She had thought that she was safe, that the peace she worked so hard to build was secure. But this assault made her question everything. Her thoughts were interrupted when Caleb suddenly appeared at her side. He moved quickly, his eyes sharp, scanning the room for threats. There was no time for explanations, no time for questions. His instincts had kicked in, and he was already preparing to defend her in the palace. Stay close to me, Lyra, Caleb said, his voice firm but calm. The tone was different from the man who had shown her tenderness and love. Now he was all business, and she could see the warrior within him taking charge. We need to get to safety. I'll make sure you're protected. Lyra nodded, her heart filled with mixed emotions. She was afraid, but not just because of the attack. Caleb's transformation from a gentle husband to a battle-hardened warrior was both a shock and a relief. He had been hiding his strength for so long, but now he was the man she needed him to be. The man who could protect her, who could face any danger, head dash on. As they moved through the palace, Lyra couldn't help but watch Caleb closely. His every move was purposeful, his eyes sharp and watchful. He led her down hallways, through hidden corridors, and into the royal vaults, where the most valuable artifacts and secrets of the Empire were kept. Caleb had no intention of letting the attackers reach her. He was doing everything in his power to ensure her safety. "You've been through worse, haven't you?" Lyra asked, her voice quiet but filled with curiosity. They had just turned a corner when she finally spoke. "I can see it in your eyes. The way you move." "You fought in battles before?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He was focused on the sounds coming from the hallways ahead, the faint shouts and clanging of weapons. The enemy was getting closer. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low. "I've been in many battles, fought in wars across the galaxy. I've seen people die, fought alongside soldiers I would have called brothers. But I've also seen the damage war does. The pain, the destruction." He paused, his voice heavy with the weight of his past. "That's why I left it all behind. I didn't want that life anymore. I wanted peace. I wanted to be with you." Lyra's heart clenched as she listened to him. He had given up so much for her. He had walked away from everything he knew just to be with her. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just about her trusting him. It was about him trusting her with the truth. He had shared his past, the parts of himself that he thought were too dangerous, too dark for anyone to see. Stayed by her side, ready to protect her with his life. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I don't know what to say." He turned to face her, his eyes softening for a moment. "You don't have to say anything. Not asking you to understand. I'm just asking you to trust me now. I'm still the man you married, the man who loves you." She nodded, the truth sinking in. She had always known there was more to Caleb than met the eye, but now she understood. This was the man she had chosen to be with, the man who had been a soldier, a warrior, but who had also chosen to protect the life they had built together. Before she could speak again, the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. The enemy was coming. Caleb didn't hesitate. He reached for the sword that had been hidden beneath his cloak, his fingers wrapping around the hilt with practiced ease. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as he unsheathed the blade. The metal gleaming in the low light of the hallway, he looked at her, his expression calm but determined. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. "I'll keep you safe, but I need you to trust me." The sound of the enemy's footsteps grew louder as they turned the corner. Caleb's grip tightened on the sword. He stepped forward, moving silently, his body ready for the confrontation. Lyra felt her pulse race as the reality of the situation hit her. This wasn't just a simple attack. It was a test of everything they had built, everything they had hoped for. As the first enemy soldier appeared in the doorway, Caleb was already in motion. His sword flashed through the air, striking with precision. The soldier never stood a chance. Before Lyra could even blink, the man was on the ground. Defeated, but there were more coming. Caleb moved swiftly, his movements fluid and graceful, almost as if he had been doing this his whole life. The enemies advanced, but Caleb was always one step ahead, cutting through them with ease. Lyra watched in awe, her heart pounding as Caleb fought to protect her. Each swing of his sword, each movement, was like watching a master at work. She realized now that the man she had married was not just a humble traveler. He was a force to be reckoned with. He was a warrior, a protector, and above all, was the man she loved. When the last of the attackers was defeated, Caleb lowered his sword, his breath heavy but steady. He turned to face Lyra, who was still standing in the shadows, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. "Are you all right?" Caleb asked, his voice softening as he approached her. Lyra nodded, her heart still racing. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I just... I never realized how much you had hidden from me. But I see it now, I see you." Caleb smiled faintly, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I never wanted you to see that part of me," he said quietly. "But now, you know who I really am." Lyra stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I do," she said softly, "and I trust you." now more than ever. In that moment, as they stood together amidst the chaos of the palace, Lyra realized that their love had not only survived the tests of time, it had just been tested, in a way neither of them had expected. But it was stronger than ever. The palace was eerily silent after the attack. The soldiers had cleared the halls, and the echoes of the battle faded into the distance. But for Princess Lyra, the silence was only the beginning. Her heart still raced from the fear and excitement she had felt during the fight. The truth about Caleb had become clearer than ever. He was not just the gentle, kind man she had married. He was a warrior. The power he wielded was far greater than she could have ever imagined. As she walked through the now quiet corridors of the palace, her mind kept returning to the moments when Caleb had drawn his sword. His movements had been so precise, so practiced. Each strike had been perfect, each decision made in an instant, as if he were used to fighting enemies far more dangerous than the ones who had attacked the palace. His sword had become an extension of him, a tool of protection and a symbol of a past he had hoped to leave behind. Lyra couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and fear. She had always known that Caleb had something more inside him, but the reality of his skills was overwhelming. In the heat of battle, she had seen not just a man protecting her, but a warrior who had lived through horrors she couldn't fully comprehend. And yet, as much as she admired his strength, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he was hiding even more from her when the attack was over. Caleb had taken her to the royal chambers. He had locked the doors and drawn the curtains, ensuring that no one could see them. The tension between them was thick. Lyra couldn't ignore the question that had been on her mind ever since the battle. Why had Caleb kept his past a secret for so long? She looked at him now, sitting on the edge of the bed, his sword resting beside him. His face was covered in sweat, his breathing still heavy from the fight. He looked so different in that moment. Not just as her husband, but as the man who had fought in countless wars. Caleb, Lyra began softly, her voice trembling with the weight of her thoughts. You didn't tell me the truth about your past. You hid it from me. Why? Caleb looked up, meeting her gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness, just the same calm resolve that he always had. He took a deep breath before answering, as if preparing himself for the difficult conversation ahead. I didn't want you to see me like this, Lyra, he said quietly. I didn't want you to see the man I was, the man I had to become. I thought that if I could just leave it all behind, I could be the man you deserved. I wanted to be with you, not as a soldier, but as someone who could make you happy. But my past, it's always with me. And when I drew my sword today, I knew that it would never be fully gone. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes softening. I don't care about your past, Caleb. I care about who you are now. You protected me today, and I saw the strength in you. I saw the man I married. But I also saw the warrior inside of youth, one you've been hiding from me, and I need to know more. What else are you hiding? Caleb's gaze dropped to the sword beside him. He ran his fingers over the hilt, as if trying to find the right words. After a long pause, he finally spoke. This sword is a reminder of everything. I used to be, he said. When I was a soldier, it was my weapon, my shield, my strength. I fought for honor, for justice, for causes I believed in. But I've also killed. I've done things that haunt me every day. And that's why I left it all behind. I thought that if I could just live a quiet life, I could forget all of it. But then I met you, Lyra, and I realized that I couldn't run away from who I was. I couldn't escape the past, not entirely. Lyra's heart ached for him. She reached out, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. I understand now, Caleb. I understand that you've carried the weight of this for so long. But I want you to know something. She paused, taking a deep breath. I don't care what you've done in the past. I care about who you are now. I love you for who you are, not for the man you were before. You've protected me, and that's what matters. Caleb looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. He took her hand, holding it firmly, as if drawing strength from her words. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Lyra, he said softly, I've done things I wish I could take back. But I can't. I can only promise you this. I'll protect you with my life, I'll never let anything happen to you." Lyra smiled, her heart swelling with affection for him. "I believe you, Caleb. I've always believed in you." The room was quiet again, but this time the silence was comfortable, filled with a sense of understanding between them. Caleb's past was not something he could erase, but it was also not something that defined him. He had made mistakes, yes, but he had also chosen to protect her with everything he had, and that was enough for her. But as the quiet stretched on, Lyra couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The attack on the palace was just the beginning. Whoever had sent those soldiers after her would not stop. In Caleb's past, the very thing he had hoped to leave behind would come back to haunt them both. As if reading her thoughts, Caleb stood up and walked to the window. He gazed out at the stars, his eyes distant, lost in thought. "I knew this. Day would come," he said quietly. "I knew that my past would find me again, but now I have something to fight for. You, Lyra, you're worth everything I've left behind. And I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe," Lyra rejoined. Him at the window, standing beside him as they looked out at the galaxy. "We'll face it together," she said softly. "Whatever comes, we'll face it as one." Caleb turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "Yes, together." And in that moment, Lyra knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. Caleb had shown her the strength he had hidden, and now, together, they would face the enemies that threatened them both. No past could ever break the bond they had formed. The days that followed the attack on the palace were filled with tension. The sound of marching soldiers, whispers of rebellion, and reports of rising threats echoed through the halls. The peace Lyra had fought so hard to build was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The attackers were just the beginning, and worse things were coming. Despite the danger, Lyra found herself drawn to Caleb. The man she had married, the man who had been so calm, so gentle, was now a warrior again, fighting for her, fighting for their home. The fear in her heart was still there, but it was replaced with a growing respect for the man who stood beside her. The man who had kept so many secrets, but who had proven time and time again that he would do anything to protect her. The royal court was in chaos. Many of Lyra's advisors were urging her to send for reinforcements, to send word to other systems for help. But Lyra knew that reinforcements could take days, weeks, even. The threat was already here, and they didn't have that much time. "I won't leave you," Caleb had said that night as they discussed their next steps. His voice was firm, filled with resolve. "I've fought wars across the galaxy, Lyra. I know what it means to face impossible odds, but I won't let anyone harm you, not while I'm still breathing." The words had settled in her heart like a heavy weight. She didn't know if she was ready for what was coming. She had never faced a battle like this, never imagined her peaceful life could turn into one of constant fear and uncertainty. But Caleb was ready, and in that moment, she realized she was ready too as night fell. The sound of distant explosions could be heard in the far-off city. The enemy was closing in. They had not just attacked the palace, they had attacked the entire capital. The city was burning, and there was no place left to hide. Lyra stood in the war room, her fingers brushing over the map of the capital. Caleb was beside her, studying the lines of defense, looking for weaknesses. "They'll come for the palace next," he said, his voice quiet. "We need to prepare." Lyra nodded, trying to steady her racing heart. "What do we do?" "We stand and fight," Caleb replied, his voice unwavering. "We defend what's ours. We defend you." The plan was simple. Caleb would lead the royal guard to hold the palace's gates. Lyra, though terrified, would stay with the soldiers, directing them and keeping the morale high. It was not an ideal position for a princess, but in this moment, she was no longer just a ruler. She was part of the fight. She had to be. As Caleb left to organize the troops, Lyra stayed behind in the war room, preparing her own strategy. She knew that she couldn't just stand by while her people fought. She had to help in any way she could. She had never been trained for war, but she had the heart of a leader, and that was enough. Hours passed. The palace trembled under the weight of the battle outside, but inside, Lyra and Caleb's plans were put into motion. Soldiers stood ready, weapons drawn, faces set with determination. Every one of them knew what was at stake, not just the palace, not just the throne, but the future of their people. Lyra's mind raced as she paced the war room, reviewing the plan over and over. She could hear the sound of weapons clashing outside, the screams of soldiers engaged in battle. Her thoughts kept returning to Caleb. He was out there, fighting, protecting her. The thought filled her with both dread and pride. He had proven time and time again that he was a force to be reckoned with, but would it be enough? A sudden knock at the door broke her thoughts. One of her commanders entered, his face grim. "Your Highness," he said, bowing respectfully. "The enemy is at the gates." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. It was time. It was no more waiting. She had to be brave. She had to face this challenge with the same strength Caleb had shown. She looked at the commander. Her voice steady, despite the fear bubbling inside her. "Gather the troops," she said, her words sharp. "We hold the palace. We fight for our home." Outside the war room, the battle had already begun. Caleb's soldiers stood firm, but the enemy was relentless. The sounds of explosions and clashing steel filled the air. Lyra moved quickly, joining the commanders at the front of the palace gates. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she kept her expression calm, determined. She couldn't let fear control her. She had to be strong for Caleb, for her people. Caleb appeared at her side, his face bloodied but unbowed. He had a fierce look in his eyes, the look of a man who had fought and survived countless battles. He didn't say a word, but the silent connection between them spoke volumes. He had always been ready to fight. Now, he was ready to fight for her. The enemy forces broke through the outer defenses, and the battle surged forward. Lyra stood tall, at Caleb's side, watching as he commanded the soldiers with the precision of a true leader. Every movement, every decision was made with the ease of a man who had spent years in war. He was fighting with the same skill and strength he had used on the battlefield, and his focus never wavered. But there were too many. The enemy forces were vast, and the palace gates were beginning to crack under the pressure. Lyra's heart raced. She knew they couldn't hold out much longer. It was then that Caleb's voice cut through the noise. "Fall back," he shouted. "We fight another day." But Lyra stood firm. "No, Caleb, we don't retreat. We fight until the last breath." Caleb turned to her, his expression fierce but filled with love. "We'll fight, but we'll fight smart. We'll win together." Lyra nodded, the determination burning inside her. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She wasn't just a ruler. Oh, she was part of the fight. And with Caleb by her side, she knew they could face whatever the future held. The battle raged on. But in that moment, Lyra and Caleb were united in their strength, their will to survive, and their love for each other. No matter what came next, they would face it together. The sound of the battle had grown deafening. The palace gates had been breached, and the enemy was flooding into the courtyard. The once calm and peaceful halls of the royal palace were now filled with the cries of warriors and the clash of weapons. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground trembled beneath their feet as explosions rang out in every direction. Lyra stood at the front of the palace, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the roar of the battle just beyond the gates, and she could feel the weight of the decisions she had made. She had never imagined she would be in the middle of such a fight. She had always been a ruler, a princess who worked to keep the peace. But now, that peace was slipping away, and the future of her people was on the line. Beside her stood Caleb, his sword drawn, his body tense as he scanned the battlefield. He had led them through countless skirmishes, his strength and skill undeniable. But even he couldn't fight this battle alone. His warriors were exhausted, their numbers thinned, and the enemy was relentless. "We can't hold them much longer," Caleb said, his voice grim. His eyes flickered to the gates, where the enemy's forces were growing larger with each passing moment. "We need to fall back, find a way to regroup." Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with determination. "No, Caleb, we can't retreat. Not now. We've come this far." He looked at her, his expression conflicted. He could see the resolve in her eyes, but he also knew the danger they were facing. The palace was surrounded, and the enemy had them trapped. If they didn't make a choice soon, they would all be overrun. "I know you want to protect them, Lyra," Caleb said quietly, his hand resting on her shoulder. But we have to think about what comes next. The palace can be rebuilt, but your life cannot be replaced. Oh, we have to get you to safety. Lyra shook her head, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision before her. She had spent her life preparing for moments like this, moments where the fate of her people hung in the balance. She couldn't turn her back now. She had promised to protect them, to protect him. I won't leave, she said firmly, her voice steady. We fight together. We die together if we must. This is our home, Caleb. These people are my family. I'm not running away. Caleb's eyes softened as he looked at her, but the reality of the situation was clear. He knew her heart. He knew that she wasn't going to back down no matter what. But the thought of losing her, of seeing her hurt, was a weight he couldn't bear. There's another way, Caleb said suddenly, his voice low. I know of a secret passage beneath the palace. It leads out into the city and it's not known to many. If we can get you out, you'll be safe. You can escape the city while I stay behind to fight. Lyra's eyes widened in disbelief. You want me to run? She asked, the words bitter on her tongue. I thought we were fighting for something here, for our home, for our future. I don't want you to leave, Caleb said, his voice raw with emotion. But if you stay, if you continue to fight, you may not make it. I can't lose you, Lyra, not after everything we've been through. I love you too much. Her heart ached at the words, and for a moment the weight of the choice she had to make almost brought her to her knees. She had always believed in the strength of her people, in the power of unity and resolve. But now, as she stood at the edge of a battlefield, she realized that love was the one thing she couldn't ignore. I love you too, Caleb, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I am a princess. I can't abandon them. You know I can't. Caleb's grip on her shoulder tightened. And I'm a warrior, Lyra. But I can't fight this battle alone. I can't protect you if I'm too busy trying to save myself. Lyra's mind raced. The sounds of the battle were growing louder, and she knew time was running out. There was no easy answer, no perfect solution. She could stay and fight beside Caleb, knowing the odds were against them. Or she could take the escape route Caleb offered, protecting herself, but abandoning the very people she had vowed to lead. As the sounds of the enemy closed in on the palace, Lyra made her choice. She couldn't leave her people behind, couldn't turn her back on the ones who had trusted her. She was their leader, their symbol of hope. And if she left now, it would shatter the very thing they were fighting for. No, she said firmly, meeting Caleb's gaze with a strength she hadn't known she had. I won't run. I'm staying. We fight together. We fight for everything we've built. Caleb's face softened, but the pain in his eyes was still there. He knew what this choice meant. It meant facing an uncertain future with little hope of survival. But it also meant standing side by side, fighting together until the end, and that was enough for him. Then we fight, Caleb said, his voice filled with both love and resolve. Together, the two of them turned to face the battlefield. The palace gates had fallen, and the enemy was closing in, but Lyra didn't flinch. She could hear the battle cries of her people, the sounds of their courage and strength rising to meet the challenge, and she knew that no matter what happened next, they would fight as one. Together. They walked into the heart of the palace courtyard, ready to face whatever awaited them. Lyra was no longer just a princess. She was a warrior, in her own right, and she would stand by Caleb until the very end.